Hello, and welcome back to Horror Drift Stories. Before we begin, feel free to leave a comment and tell me where you're listening from. I love reading them. If you enjoy drifting into dark and unsettling stories, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, get comfortable, relax your mind, let the outside world fade away, and let's begin. Story 1. Sierra, how many times have I stood in front of your grave now? I stopped counting after the first year. At first I went every Sunday, then every day. Then, whenever I could drag myself out of bed, I would stand there and tell myself it wasn't real, that this was some long, cruel dream, and I would wake up and find you in the kitchen, making coffee, humming off key like you always did. But every time I woke up, you were still gone. I would trace your name with my fingers, like touching the letters could warm them. I would talk to the stone, like it could answer me. I would imagine your hands in mine, your lips brushing against my cheek, you telling me to stop being dramatic. I would whisper that I loved you, that I missed you, that I didn't know how to live in a world that didn't have you in it. I lost my job not long after you died. I stopped showing up on time. Then, I stopped showing up at all. Depression settled into me like a permanent guest. It wasn't loud. It didn't scream. It just sat there, heavy and patient. Every day felt like walking through water. I remember the day we got married, the way you stared at the ring on your finger, like it was something magical. You kept turning your hand in the light, smiling to yourself. I remember thinking that if I never did anything else right in my life, at least I had done that. I had made you that happy. I remember the first time I saw you. I was so nervous I almost walked away. I stood there rehearsing what to say. Then I forced myself to go up to you. I probably sounded ridiculous. I remember the way you tilted your head when you listened. I remember how my heart felt like it was going to explode when you said yes to being my girlfriend. 7 years. We were together 7 years before we got married. 7 years of late-night talks, cheap dinners, dancing in the kitchen, arguing about nothing, making up like it was the end of the world. Now, my phone just sits there. 30 missed calls, 12 new messages, 20 unread notifications. I don't answer most of them. Sometimes I look down at my screen, and for a split second I expect to see your name light up. I feel like a fool every time it doesn't. Days turn into weeks, weeks turn into months, months blur into years. I still crave your touch. I crave your warmth in bed at night. I crave the way your eyes would soften when you looked at me like I was the only person in the world. I crave the memory of us dancing outside on the patio, the city around us glowing, music drifting from a speaker, your arms around my neck, my hands at your waist. The moon was full that night. The buildings framed it perfectly. We swayed like idiots in love, and you laughed when I stepped on your foot. We were supposed to have kids one day. We used to talk about it like it was inevitable. A backyard, toys scattered in the grass. You said you wanted a daughter with my eyes. I said I wanted a son with your smile. One night, I finally slept deeply. I don't know why that night was different. Maybe I was exhausted from crying. Maybe my body gave up fighting the grief for a few hours. I dreamed about you. It wasn't a vague dream. It was vivid, the kind that feels more real than waking life. I could see every detail. I could hear your voice as clearly as if you were standing in front of me. My love, babe, Tom, stop being so hard on yourself, you said. Hands on your hips like you used to when you pretended to scold me. You've been at that computer for hours. Give yourself a break. We were in our old apartment. I was sitting at my desk, staring at my screen, just like I used to. I looked tired, frustrated. Yeah, I know. I said in the dream. You don't understand. The internet is impossible. I work 8 hours at a job I hate. Then I come home and pour everything into these animations. And look at the views. 5 views 1 month, 23 the next, 77 on the last one. I put so much into them, and nobody cares. You walked over to me and wrapped your arms around my shoulders. You kissed my cheek, like you always did when I spiraled. Tom, you just started. You said softly, do you expect to take over the world in one day? Stop doing this for other people. Do it because you love it. I'm proud of you. I love you. I shook my head. Even in the dream, I felt that old insecurity. You're a nurse, I said. You have a real career. I work at a gas station and animate videos no one watches. I don't even know how to feel about my own work anymore. You pulled back just enough to look at me seriously. So what if you work at a gas station, you said. Isn't that where you met me? It pays the bills. And we've been saving. We finally have enough for a better place. I want a backyard for our kids, Tom. I always wanted children with you. You took my hands, and I squeezed yours tighter. I want that too, I said. I don't know what I'd do without you. I love you. And your body turned into butterflies. Thousands of white butterflies burst outward, wings brushing against my face, my chest, my hands. They swirled around me and then flew away, out into nothing. I woke up gasping. My heart was racing. My room was dark except for the faint glow of the city outside. And there, at the end of my bed, was a white butterfly. It sat still for a moment, wings folded. Then it lifted itself and drifted toward my open window. I stumbled out of bed and ran to the window. I looked down at the street. Cars and trucks moved along, headlights sliding across the asphalt. People were probably inside those buildings, curled up with someone they loved. And I stood there alone. The butterfly was gone. I went back to bed because there was nothing else to do. The next morning, I made coffee. The routine felt mechanical. I stood by the patio door, sipping slowly, listening to the city wake up. The sounds were normal. Traffic, voices, distant sirens. Then I heard it. A flutter of wings inside my apartment. It wasn't faint. It was close. I turned and followed the sound down the hallway. It led to my workroom, the room with my computer desk and bookshelves. As I got closer, my chest tightened. The door was covered in white butterflies. They weren't normal. Their wings glowed softly, like they carried light inside them. They didn't scatter when I stepped closer. They just stayed there, layered over the wood like living wallpaper. Some of them lifted off and began circling me. They flew in slow spirals, forming a small vortex in the middle of my living room. The air felt electric. Then I heard a voice from behind the door. Thomas? Babe? Are you there? Please come in and talk to me. I've been waiting for you. It was your voice. Clear, soft, exactly the way it used to sound when you called me from another room. My hands shook as I reached for the doorknob. The butterflies didn't move when I touched it. They didn't react when I opened the door. Inside, you were standing by the window. You looked exactly like you did the last day I saw you. Your brunette hair styled in soft waves. Your eyes bright and warm. Your white blouse. Your jeans. The heels you wore when you wanted to feel confident. The diamond ring still on your finger. I stopped in the doorway. This isn't real, I whispered. You died. You died in that plane crash. I waited for years, hoping they were wrong, hoping there was a mistake. You turned to face me fully. What's wrong? You asked gently. Aren't you happy to see your wife? I would be, I said, voice breaking, if it were really you. You stepped closer. Your heels clicked softly against the floor. Everything about you felt real. The way you moved, the way you breathed. You don't remember your own wife? You teased softly, leaning in to kiss me. Your lips were warm, soft, familiar. The kiss lasted longer than I expected. For a moment, I forgot everything else. Then I pulled away. This feels wrong, I said. I want it to be you. But you're gone. You smiled sadly. Your favorite color is blue, you said. On our wedding day, you spilled your drink when you stood up too fast. You were so embarrassed, you stopped wearing white shirts for months. My knees almost gave out. How do you know that? I whispered. Because it's me, you said, tears filling your eyes. You reached for my hands. Thomas, it's time to move on. I love you more than you know. I always wondered what our kids would have been like. But you're still here. You still have time. Don't waste your life waiting for someone who can't come back. Be happy. Do what you love. Live. I wrapped my arms around you and sobbed into your shoulder. I held you like I was trying to anchor you to the world. I don't want to move on, I said. I miss you so much. I know, you whispered, but you have to. Please don't do anything rash. I love you. I'll be waiting for you. You gently slipped out of my embrace and walked back toward the window. You turned one last time and smiled. I love you, Tom. I love you too, I said, my voice barely steady. Your body dissolved into white butterflies again. They rose up and drifted out the window in a soft, swirling cloud. The butterflies that had covered the door and filled the room followed, lifting off and joining the others. I ran to the window. I watched them rise higher and higher into the sky until they were nothing but pale flecks against the blue. And for the first time since you died, I didn't feel completely hollow. I felt something else. Not peace. Not yet. But maybe the beginning of it. Story 2. When we took the lighthouse job, there were 4 of us. At least, that's what I remember. The posting had sounded simple enough. The lighthouse sat miles off the coast on a strip of jagged black rock, completely cut off from the mainland except by boat. It had been automated for years, but after a recent systems failure, the company decided to send a small crew during storm season to monitor the equipment in person. It was supposed to be easy money. A few weeks of isolation, routine checks, logging weather conditions, and making sure the backup systems worked. We'd rotate out before winter hit hard. The tower itself was older than any of us. Thick stone walls, rusted railings, a narrow spiral staircase that twisted all the way up to the lantern room. The air inside always smelled faintly of salt and old metal. When the wind picked up, the whole structure hummed like something alive. The first 2 days were uneventful. The ocean was rough, but that was normal for that time of year. The wind howled almost constantly, rattling the windows and shaking the outer railings. Waves slammed into the rocks below, so hard the entire tower vibrated. Still, lighthouses are built to endure punishment. It felt solid, reliable. There were 4 of us, me, Daniel, Mark, and Elliot. Elliot was the quiet one, mid-30s, pale, sharp-featured. He kept mostly to himself, spent hours staring out at the water, even when there was nothing to see. I remember thinking he looked like he belonged there more than the rest of us. On the 3rd day, the sky changed. By late afternoon, thick clouds rolled in from the horizon, swallowing what little sunlight we had. The air grew heavy and electric. You could taste the storm before it arrived. By midnight, It was fully upon us. I have never seen rain fall that hard. The wind screamed around the tower, a constant shriek that seeped through the walls. The waves below crashed with such force it felt like the rocks themselves might crack apart. The dock groaned under the strain. We gathered in the lower level to check supplies and equipment when we heard it. A metallic snap from outside. Daniel ran to the small window that overlooked the dock. "The boat," he shouted. Through sheets of rain and darkness, we saw it drift away from the rocks. The rope had either snapped or come undone. Within seconds, it was swallowed by the black water, vanishing between waves. We were stranded. There was no signal out there during storms. No way to call for help. We'd have to wait until morning and hope the company noticed when we missed our scheduled check-in. Around 2 a.m., the main power cut out. The interior lights flickered once, twice. Then everything went dark. The only light left came from above. The lantern room at the top had switched to backup power automatically. The beam continued sweeping across the violent ocean in steady rotations, slicing through rain and darkness. For a moment, none of us spoke. The darkness felt thick, pressed in close. That's when we heard the knocking. It came from below. 3 slow, heavy thuds. Not from the door, not from the walls, from beneath us. We all froze. There is nothing beneath that lighthouse but solid concrete foundation and rock. The base is built directly into the stone. There is no basement, no crawl space, no hollow chamber. The knocking came again. 3 strikes, evenly spaced. Boom, boom, boom. The sound vibrated through the floorboards and into my feet. Mark whispered, "That's just the waves." But it wasn't random. It wasn't chaotic like the storm. It was deliberate. We forced ourselves to move. We grabbed flashlights and made our way down the spiral staircase to the lowest level. The knocking stopped the moment we started descending. The lower room was dry. No cracks. No flooding. The heavy metal entrance door was still bolted from the inside. No signs of damage. Nothing explained what we had heard. We stood there for a long moment, listening to the storm rage outside. Silence from below. We went back up. That's when the beam stopped. We noticed it immediately. The familiar rotating sweep of light across the walls had ceased. The reflection that usually passed rhythmically through the stairwell windows was frozen. We climbed to the lantern room. The motor housing emitted a low grinding sound before going completely still. The beam was locked in place, pointing straight out into the storm. Through the rain-streaked glass, we followed its path. In the distance, exactly where the beam rested, something stood in the water. At first, I thought it was debris. Then I realized it was vertical, too tall to be a boat, too steady to be wreckage. It rose from the ocean like a dark pillar, darker than the night around it. And it wasn't moving. Waves crashed violently around it, but it remained fixed. We stared in silence. Then the knocking started again. This time, it came from the door. 3 slow strikes. Boom, boom, boom. The sound was unmistakable. Metal vibrating against metal. The front door was being knocked on. The waves outside were slamming against the rocks, with enough force to tear a person off their feet. No, one could stand at that door in that storm. It was impossible. And yet, the handle began to turn. Slowly, deliberately, like someone testing the lock. Daniel backed away first. Mark grabbed a wrench from the wall, as if that would matter. Elliot stood completely still, staring down the staircase toward the lower level. The handle stopped moving. Another pause. Then silence. Above us, the grinding motor suddenly kicked back to life. The lantern resumed its rotation as if nothing had happened. The beam swept away from the dark shape in the water, and when it passed over that spot again, the shape was gone. The rest of the night passed without incident. None of us slept. By morning, the storm had cleared as if it had never existed. The sky was pale blue, the sea calm and glassy. Sunlight glinted off the wet rocks. We went outside carefully. The dock was intact, and the boat was back, tied neatly in place. The rope was dry, not frayed, not snapped, perfectly secure. None of us remembered going out there. None of us would have been able to in that storm. We searched the tower again. That's when we realized Elliot was gone. His bed was empty. His jacket hung on its hook. His boots were still by the door. He wouldn't have gone outside barefoot. Not on those rocks. We searched every level, every corner, the storage rooms, the lantern room, the narrow spaces between walls. There was nowhere to hide. No broken windows. No blood. No sign of struggle. Just 3 deep dents in the outside of the metal entrance door. Perfectly spaced, as if something heavy had struck it. 3 times. We reported the disappearance as soon as we made it back to shore later that day. The company arranged transport once the weather cleared fully. We didn't argue. None of us wanted to stay another night. Weeks later, I couldn't stop thinking about it. About the knocking, the frozen beam, the shape in the water. About Elliot. So I requested access to the company's official shift logs. I told them I was just curious about past incidents. The file was simple. Date, location, crew assignment. According to the records, only 3 workers had ever been assigned to that lighthouse during that shift. Me, Daniel, Mark. There was no Elliot. No 4th bed listed. No 4th paycheck. No emergency contact. I called Daniel immediately. Who was the 4th guy? I asked. There was a long pause on the line. What 4th guy? He said. I laughed nervously. Elliot, the quiet one, the one who disappeared. Another silence. There were only 3 of us, Daniel replied. You, me, and Mark. My mouth went dry. I hung up and went through my phone. I searched for photos from that trip. There were dozens. The 4 bunks in the sleeping quarters. Except when I counted them, there were only 3. Every group photo taken inside the lighthouse showed 3 figures. Every single one. But I remember 4 voices around the table. 4 sets of footsteps on the stairs. 4 shadows against the walls. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind hits my apartment windows just right, I hear it. 3 slow knocks. Not from the door. From beneath the floor. Boom, boom, boom. And I can't help but wonder if we weren't stranded in that lighthouse during the storm. Maybe something else was stranded with us, waiting for the light to stop. Story 3. I've asked everyone I know about this, and I still don't have an explanation. Friends, co-workers, a priest, a woman who calls herself a witch. Nobody has been able to tell me what to do, or even what this is. It started almost a month ago. That night was completely normal. I had been working late on my computer, trying to finish a project before a deadline. When I finally shut everything down, I went through my usual routine, brushed my teeth, changed into pajamas, turned on a nature documentary at low volume. I set the sleep timer like I always do, and rolled onto my side. A few minutes later, the TV shut off. The room went quiet, but I couldn't sleep. I blamed the coffee. I'd had 1 too many cups to stay focused. My mind kept running through a checklist of things I might have forgotten. Bills, emails, groceries. That's when I remembered the internet bill. The due date was coming up and I hadn't paid it yet. I was about to grab my phone to distract myself when I heard it. Boom. It wasn't loud enough to shake the house. Just the sound of something hitting the floor. Solid. Hollow. I lay still, listening. Probably the neighbors, I told myself. Maybe someone dropped something upstairs, or a cat knocked over a trash can outside. Then, it happened again. Boom. This time, I knew it wasn't the neighbors. The sound came from inside my house. I sat up immediately. My heart started pounding in that slow, heavy way it does when adrenaline kicks in. I looked around for something I could use as a weapon. The only thing within reach was my camera tripod. I grabbed it and held it like a bat. Another boom. It was coming from the living room. I stepped out of the bedroom slowly, every muscle tense. I could feel my breath in my throat. I imagined someone crouched behind the couch, someone waiting. When I turned the corner into the living room, I saw it. A rubber ball, about the size of an apple. It hit the floor again. Boom. It bounced up to almost shoulder height, then fell again. Boom. I just stood there, staring. There were no strings attached, no one holding it. It wasn't rolling. It wasn't bouncing unpredictably. It was rising and falling in perfect rhythm. Boom. Boom. I felt cold. I lowered the tripod slowly and set it beside the couch. I walked into the kitchen because I suddenly felt like I needed water more than answers. I turned on the faucet, filled a glass. Another boom echoed from the living room. I walked back, leaned one hand on my hip, and watched it bounce while I drank. Boom, boom. There was something deeply wrong about how consistent it was. Same height, same timing. I stepped forward and caught it midair. It felt normal, just rubber, slightly warm from movement. I carried it to the dining table and set it down firmly. It didn't move. I finished my water, went back to bed, and didn't hear it again that night. The next morning, I looked for it. It was gone. I checked the table, the floor, under the couch. Nothing. I went to work, tried not to think about it. That night, I went to bed early. I actually fell asleep quickly. Until, boom, I jerked awake. 12:35 a.m. Boom. I didn't move at first. I stared at the ceiling and waited. Boom. I swore under my breath and got up. The ball was in the living room again. Same steady rhythm. I grabbed it, and without even thinking, I threw it out the window. Hard. I went back to bed and fell asleep from pure exhaustion. The next day was fine. I told my friend Fred about it over lunch. He gave me that look people give when they think you're joking but aren't sure. I laughed it off. That night, I woke up again. Boom. 12:35. Like clockwork. I sat up, furious. I don't care who you are. This isn't funny. I said out loud. I grabbed the ball and put it in my nightstand drawer. The next morning, it was gone. The following night, I invited Fred and his wife Lena over. I needed witnesses. We played poker, had a few drinks. I didn't mention the ball. At exactly 12:35, from the living room, boom. Fred paused mid-sentence. "What's that?" he asked. I didn't answer right away. Another boom. "It's the ball," I said quietly. We walked into the living room together. There it was, bouncing. Boom, boom. Fred's face shifted from confusion to irritation. "This isn't funny," he said. "You're going too far." Lena squeezed his arm. "It's not me," I said. Boom. He stepped closer, looking for wires, for magnets, for anything. There was nothing. I picked it up and threw it out the window again. Fred and Lena left soon after. They didn't say much. The next nights were identical. Every single night. 12:35. Boom. 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 I bought earplugs. The sound cut through them like they weren't there. I threw the ball in the trash. Boom. I tossed it into the river. Boom. I left it in a public park. Boom. I called a priest. He came, blessed the house, muttered prayers, told me to have faith. That night, 12:35. Boom. I found a witch online. She said it was a curse. Charged me almost an entire month's salary. Burned herbs. Drew symbols on my floor. 12:35. Boom. I lost it. I grabbed the ball and took it into the kitchen. I took the sharpest knife I owned and sliced it open. It was hollow. Nothing inside. No mechanism. No metal core. Just rubber. I cut it into pieces. Small fragments. I threw them into the fireplace and lit them. As they burned, I caught a faint smell. Not rubber. Iron. Like blood. I stood there until the pieces turned to ash. I shoveled the remains into a bag and threw it away. That night, I waited. 12:35. Boom. The ball bounced in the living room. Perfect, whole. The next day, my boss fired me. Said I'd been distracted, late, unreliable. I didn't argue. That evening, I went to Fred's house. I know how it sounds. I told him, please, just stay up with me until 12:35. He agreed. We sat in his living room, talked about old times, drank too much. I kept checking the clock. 12:35. From his hallway. Boom. We both froze. Boom. Fred's face drained of color. We walked slowly toward the sound. The ball was bouncing in his house now. Boom. Boom. Fred waved his hands around it, looking for something invisible, holding it up. Nothing. I picked it up. I've tried everything, I whispered. Fred looked at me like I had brought something into his home. I'm sorry, he said. He hasn't answered my calls since. I'm alone again. It's 12:28 right now as I write this. The house is silent. I don't know what the ball is. I don't know why it chose 12:35. I don't know if it's counting down to something. The worst part isn't the sound anymore. It's the waiting. 6 minutes left. My heart is already racing. I'm sitting in the living room this time, watching the floor. 12:34. The air feels heavy. 12:35. Boom. Story 4. I live in an old New England town, the kind with white steepled churches, leaning gravestones, and trees that whisper even when there's no wind. For 300 years, people say it has been haunted by a witch named Zuriel. We learn about her before we can even properly spell our own names. The older kids teach the younger ones on the playground, in corners of classrooms, at sleepovers with flashlights under their chins. They lower their voices and widen their eyes as they explain. She will knock on your door disguised as a traveler. She will ask for a glass of water because she is terribly thirsty. You will know it is her because she will not drink it. There are 5 rules, and everyone in town knows them by heart. You must let her in. You must be friendly at all times. You must not show that you are afraid of her. You must not let her out of your sight. You must not let her pass the first room of your house. Whenever someone dies in a tragic accident, falls downstairs, drowns in a bathtub, chokes on food, whispers spread like smoke, they must have seen her. They must have broken one of the rules. Adults claim they don't believe in such nonsense. Yet nearly every house has a glass and a bottle of water waiting by the front door, just in case. I used to be a skeptic. As a child, I was terrified of her. If someone knocked at our door unexpectedly, I would run to my room and lock myself inside. I would sit on my bed, hugging my knees, waiting for silence. But she never came. As I grew older, I researched her. I wanted to disprove the story. Historical records show that a woman named Zeriel did live here in the early 1700s. She was described as a maiden of most ill-favored countenance. She lived alone at the edge of the woods and was widely disliked. The townsfolk believed she was troubled by an unclean spirit. They accused her of trespassing and strange behavior. In 1734, a pious woman found Zeriel's body in her shed. Her throat had been cut almost to the bone. Although some young men had openly spoken of ridding the town of the foul witch, none were prosecuted. A murder, covered up by superstition. That was my conclusion. After I married and moved into a house with my husband, he insisted we keep a glass and bottle of water by the door. I rolled my eyes, but allowed it. It wasn't worth arguing over. Last Friday at around 3 in the afternoon, I had just put my 2-year-old son down for a nap when I heard a knock at the door. I didn't think twice. I opened it. A woman stood there, maybe 40, dressed in hiking clothes. Her brown bob was stylish and neat despite the sweat on her forehead. She looked like someone from a city magazine, not from our quiet town. "Hi, can I help you?" I asked. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said politely. "May I have a glass of water? My bottle is empty, and I'm terribly thirsty." A hiker asking for water. That's all. You must let her in. "Of course," I said. "Please, come in." She stepped inside almost shyly. For a split second, something inside me screamed to slam the door in her face. I didn't. She hovered by the entrance. I reached for the glass and bottle that were sitting right beside me. You must not let her out of your sight. Instead of going to the kitchen, I poured the water right there. While I poured, she drifted toward the couch and sat down. I didn't like that. She noticed. Guilt flickered across her face. "You must be friendly at all times." I smiled brightly and handed her the glass. That's when I noticed something odd. She had no backpack, no water bottle, no keys, nothing. "You've been hiking?" I asked cheerfully. "I just did the mountain loop," she said with enthusiasm. It was beautiful. She held the glass in her hands. She did not drink. "And it's such a lovely day," I continued. "It's very hot," she agreed. Sweat trickled down her face and fell into her lap. She still did not drink. I forced a laugh. "I love it when it's hot." She laughed with me. Inside, I was no longer a grown woman. I was that terrified little girl again. She glanced at a framed photo of my family. "What a cutie," she whispered, eyes narrowing at my son's picture. Revulsion twisted in my stomach. "Thank you," I managed. "I have a son the same age," she said. "He's with his father. We're divorced, but we're still friends." "Oh," I said, startled. "That's good." She stood up. "I'll be on my way before it gets dark." Relief flooded me. "Of course." She walked to the door and pressed down on the handle. Then she stopped. "One last thing," she said. "May I use your restroom?" Ice slid down my spine. "You must not let her pass the first room." "I'm sorry," I said quickly. "It's out of order." "Why?" she asked lightly, returning to sit across from me. "It's clogged," I said, laughing awkwardly. She winked. "I'm handy. I can fix it." "There's a public restroom across the street," I said, pointing toward the window. My hand trembled. It was dark outside. That was impossible. She hadn't been there long enough for the sun to set. "I'd love to repay your kindness," she insisted. My husband will be home soon, I said. He likes to handle those things. She smiled knowingly. Upstairs, my son began screaming. Moo me. My body jerked instinctively, but I forced myself to stay seated. You must not let her out of your sight. Don't you want to go to him? She asked gently. He needs to learn to self-soothe, I said. He screamed louder. She grinned. Are you sure he's okay? She asked, and it sounded like a threat. I nodded, my jaw tight. After a moment, he went silent. That silence terrified me more than the screaming. You're an interesting woman, she said, leaning closer. I'd love to be friends, I blurted out. Her expression shifted. Red veins spread beneath her skin. Warts erupted. One eye turned gray. Her hair fell out in clumps. Her teeth blackened and dripped saliva. A slit opened across her throat, splitting it wide, blood pouring out. You must not show that you are afraid. I kept talking about museums, restaurants, paddleboarding, Civil War sites. The lights flickered. Her head hung by a thin strip of skin, yet her eye remained fixed on me. I smiled. The lights went out completely. I nearly screamed. Then they snapped back on. She looked perfectly normal again. You've been very kind, she said softly. Perhaps I should stay a few days. Do you have a guest room? No, I said carefully. I can sleep on the couch. I wouldn't want you uncomfortable. You don't want me here? She asked, sharply. I was losing. Then my son appeared in the doorway. Mommy. He clutched his teddy bear, cheeks still streaked with tears. She looked surprised. Hello, little man, she cooed. He walked toward her. I could not move. You must not show that you are afraid. She stretched out her hand. My son smiled and placed his teddy bear into her palm. Time froze. Her smile faltered. She clutched the bear to her chest. Something in her face changed. A sorrow deeper than anything I'd seen flickered across her features. Finally, she exhaled. I'm sure your child wants his mother to himself, she murmured. She set the teddy bear back down and rose. Thank you for your kindness. She lightly touched my hand, and she was gone. It's been 7 days. Nothing terrible has happened. No accidents, no falls, no choking, no mysterious tragedies. Life feels normal again. But every afternoon at exactly 3 o'clock, I feel a sharp, burning pain on the back of my hand, right where she touched me. Story 5. Yesterday, I interviewed and watched the first live test of a man named Clyde. He called himself a doctor, but he had no credentials. No university ties, no published work anyone could verify. What he did have was money, a private mountain estate, and an obsession with quantum physics that seemed to have swallowed whatever sense of caution he was born with. He reached out to me because of my work. I'm a self-employed reporter and science communicator. I've made a career out of explaining complicated ideas in plain language, and I've covered enough fringe claims to know how to keep my face neutral when someone says something insane with full confidence. But Clyde didn't sound insane over email. He sounded prepared. He invited me to witness what he described as a breakthrough, his latest project, and he offered me access to record everything. That alone was unusual. Men who hoard secrets don't invite journalists. Men who want the world to see something do. So I packed my equipment, topped off my gas, and drove out into the mountains. The lab didn't look like a lab. It looked like a rich man's summer home. 3 stories, crisp brickwork, too many windows, a pool out back, landscaped paths, And that clean, expensive look you only see when money has made sure every surface behaves. It should have had staff, a caretaker, security, a house manager. There was nothing. No car, no voices, no movement behind the glass. Clyde was waiting on the porch when I pulled up, like he'd been watching for me the entire time. I parked, reached for my gear, and before I even had my bag over my shoulder, he was already stepping forward, opening the door as if I were arriving at a dinner party. It was attentive in a way that felt wrong. I thanked him anyway, because politeness is a reflex, and followed him inside. He was stocky, early 40s, gray speckled hair and goatee, round glasses with thin bifocal lenses. He wore a buttoned sweater vest over a turtleneck, like he wanted to look academic, like dressing the part could fill in for credentials. Then he greeted me by my full name, not my pen name, not the shortened version I use online. My full legal name. I froze for half a second. He noticed. "That isn't meant to unsettle you," he said, and smiled in a stiff, practiced way. "I research my guests. I assume you did the same." He held out his hand. I took it. He was wearing gloves, navy-colored, covered in intense geometric patterns that looked almost too precise to be fabric. The touch of them was shockingly cold. Not painful, not wet, not like ice, just wrong cold. A cold that didn't belong on skin. He watched my reaction and immediately apologized, as if he'd been expecting it. He led me through a bright, expensive kitchen, into a sitting room, and set out a light brunch like this was normal. Fruit, bread, cheese, tea. The whole time he talked calmly, lightly, like he was hosting a friend, like he wasn't about to do something that could rewrite physics or kill him. He showed me smaller demonstrations first, the kind of thing meant to soften the ground before the big claim. And that's when I started recording. I wanted everything documented, not because I believed him yet, but because if he was lying, the lie would be clearer on playback. "Are we recording?" he asked. "Yes," I said. "Is that okay?" "That's what we're here for," he replied. And then he asked me, very casually, if I was familiar with quantum tunneling. I gave him the standard explanation. Something slips through the empty space of atoms. He corrected me politely. He had that tone some people get when they've rehearsed being smarter than everyone around them. He did an example with a piece of cheese in an opaque box. Clyde's cheese. Superposition. Observation. The whole familiar staircase of quantum analogies. Then he moved to a bin of water, divided by a barrier. He dropped a small metal cube, made ripples, and showed how some energy crosses to the other side, even when most is blocked. "Most of the waves bounce off," he said, "but some show up on the other side. That's like tunneling. Except waves of energy will never be mass. And you have the opposite problem," I said. "You're mass. You can't be energy." He smiled like he'd been waiting for me to say that. He unscrewed a canister that released heavy vapor. He reached inside and pulled out a puck patterned exactly like his gloves. He said it had been resting in liquid CO2, a superconductor, cold enough to do what he needed. He placed the magnetized metal cube above it. The cube floated, not on a fan, not on a hidden jet. It hovered motionlessly, steady and unnatural. Then he pushed it gently, and it slid out of position, and then snapped back to where it had been, like an invisible hand had pulled it home. He explained quantum locking. Then he looked at me and said, as if he were telling me he'd bought a new car, that his gloves and his suit were made of superconducting material, that he could quantum lock the particles in his body so they would stay coherent during tunneling. That's quite a claim, I told him, because it was. "That's why you're here," he said, "to see before you believe." After brunch, he took me to an elevator, and we rode down into the mountain. The lab was subterranean, windowless, cold enough that our breath fogged. He had a heavy coat waiting for me, already hung on a rack, like he'd calculated my discomfort in advance. The lab was divided into two main spaces: an observation chamber with monitors, seats, and a wall of controls that looked like it belonged in an old launch center. From there you could reach a bathroom and a photo-developing darkroom. He said the darkroom was a hobby, convenient, because there were no windows down there, and light ruins photo paper. Beyond a pressure lock was the testing chamber. It was huge, cold. The walls were lined with electromagnets arranged in a U-shaped track. At one end sat a person-sized capsule, made of that same geometric patterned material. It hovered slightly above the ground, suspended in place like the floating cube upstairs, only heavier and more serious. At the end of the track was a reinforced wall. Behind it, a net and cushioning system, like something meant to catch debris. In the corner was a changing room, where I could see the full suit hanging, skin tight, the same patterned material. The mask had no eye holes, no mouth opening. That should have been the moment I walked away. I didn't. Clyde left me in the observation chamber, showed me how to use the monitors, and told me the intercom wouldn't work once he was in vacuum. He queued up recordings of his earlier experiments for me to watch while he prepared. The first video was small scale, a particle tunneling. I felt my stomach drop. It wasn't a simulation. It wasn't a trick I could immediately spot. It looked like something that shouldn't have happening anyway. Then he showed a coin. The coin vanished at one point on the track and appeared where it shouldn't have been. Not thrown, not slid, not carried. Tunneled. If that was real, it wasn't just impressive. It was world-altering. It was the kind of thing that gets people killed for what they know. When Clyde emerged wearing the full suit, my amazement curdled into something else. The suit looked like a second skin. The mask was smooth and sealed. He looked less like a scientist and more like a man trying to become a device. He spoke through the intercom, calm as ever, telling me he would depressurize the chamber while he acclimated. He made a joke about not wanting to catch fire from air friction. I sat down at the monitors. I tried to slow my breathing. He vaulted into the capsule with practiced confidence and waved at me through the transparent panel before sealing it shut. A countdown appeared on my screen. I didn't feel ready. My hands were already damp. I kept thinking, this is a man who has tunneled a coin and still wants more. The system started to hum, a low vibration under everything, like the lab itself had begun to wake up. 6, 5, 4, the capsule hovered, steady as a held breath. 3, 2, 1. The electromagnets fired in a sequence so fast my eyes couldn't track it. The track lit up like a chain reaction. The capsule shot forward. It didn't accelerate like a vehicle. It snapped into motion. It whipped around the curve faster than my brain could properly process. It became a blur, then something brighter, like it was shedding its shape. It was heading straight for the wall. And for a fraction of a second, it didn't look like a capsule anymore. It looked like a streak of light. Then it hit. The crash was so violent, it made the entire lab shake. Shards of material scattered across the chamber. The impact sounded wrong, like a thick sheet of glass being punched through by a truck. I screamed before I could stop myself. My first thought wasn't physics. It wasn't discovery. It was, I just watched a man kill himself. I fumbled with the controls to repressurize the test chamber. In my panic, I hit the wrong switches first and plunged parts of the observation chamber into darkness. Then I found the pressure controls, heard valves engage, and waited for the lock to allow entry. When the door finally opened, the air inside the test chamber felt colder than before, sharp enough to sting my lungs. My boots echoed on the metal floor. Everything smelled clean and sterile, and too cold to be real. I ran to the crash site. The wreckage looked like a crushed soda can made of ice, twisted, flattened, shattered. There was no blood, no bone, no body, no suit. I stood there staring, waiting for my brain to catch up. The wall at the end of the track was still standing. Nothing behind it, no human remains, no pieces of fabric, no helmet, just empty space. I went back to the observation chamber and replayed the recording, slowed it down, watched it again and again. He hadn't just looked like light. He might have become it, a waveform, something that could tunnel. The thought made my skin prickle. Then I remembered the dark room. If he had become a wave or a burst of energy, if he was still present in that room in some half-real way, maybe photo paper would register him. Light leaves evidence. Radiation leaves evidence. Exposure leaves evidence. I needed something to test it with. I broke the coat rack and used it as a walking stick, because the cold was getting into my joints, and I didn't trust my legs. I turned off the lights from the terminal and moved through the lab in darkness until I reached the dark room. Inside, the red safety light glowed dimly. I found a box of photo paper and carefully removed several sheets. Back in the test chamber, I laid the sheets around the room like traps, on the floor near the track, near the wall, near the capsule wreckage. I tried to cover different angles, like I was mapping a ghost. Then I waited. An hour felt like a year. Every minute I expected to hear something, a scrape, a breath, a sound through the intercom even though he said it wouldn't work. Nothing. When I couldn't take it anymore, I gathered the papers and brought them back into the dark room. I developed them one by one with the pre-mixed chemicals he kept down there. The first sheet remained blank. The second stayed white. The third showed nothing. By the time I started the fourth, I was already preparing myself to accept that this had been a stupid idea. Then, dark marks began to appear. Lines. Spots. The beginning of an image. My heart started hammering again. I finished developing it and rinsed it, hands shaking, then carried it back to the observation chamber and turned the lights on. The photo showed something that made my mouth go dry. Clyde, or something that had been Clyde. His face was there, but distorted, stretched, elongated, as if his features had been pulled sideways through a narrow gap. His eyes were wrong. The shape of his mouth looked like a scream caught mid-tear. His expression wasn't surprise or pain. In a simple way, it was anguish. Like a person who hadn't died, but hadn't stayed alive either. I stared at that image until my eyes watered. I've always considered myself a woman of science. I believe in evidence, process, reason. But standing there in that cold, staring at that paper, I prayed. Not for success, not for discovery. I prayed that whatever had happened to him ended quickly, because the thought of a human mind trapped in that state, spread thin, warped, and still aware, felt worse than death. Story 6. Bradford, in winter, never feels clean. The fog hangs low over the streets, like something that doesn't want to leave. It clings to the cobbles and creeps into alleyways, heavy and damp, carrying the smell of old diesel, wet brick, and something faintly rotten underneath. The Victorian buildings that once looked proud and solid now sag a little, their windows dark, their stonework stained with decades of neglect. And down in the hollows beneath the abandoned wool mills, something else began to move. It didn't just kill. It wore people. The first to disappear was Mickey Pritchard. Mickey worked night security at Lister Mills, which had been shut down for years. The place was mostly boarded up, its windows broken, and its yard choked with weeds and scrap metal. He did rounds alone, flashlight in hand, radio clipped to his shoulder. At 2:17 a.m., dispatch received a call. At first it was just static. Then Mickey's voice came through, strained and thin. "There's something down here," he said. "It's not." The rest dissolved into a scream so sharp it clipped the signal. Then, nothing but dead air. They searched the mill at first light. They found him on the factory floor, laid out neatly between two rusted looms. His uniform was still tidy, his boots polished, his face frozen in a silent scream, mouth stretched wide, eyes bulging as if he'd seen something too large to understand. When the paramedics tried to lift him by the arms, his body folded in on itself. There was no resistance, no weight. The skin collapsed like an empty sack. No bones, no organs, no muscle, just the outside. It hit the floor with a soft, horrible sound. The story spread fast, though the official report avoided details. Structural collapse, animal interference, gas exposure. People pretended to believe it. But then others vanished. A college student named Liam, who liked exploring abandoned buildings for urban photography. A delivery driver who'd cut through the industrial district to save time. A man sleeping rough near the canal. Each one found the same way. Skin intact, inside gone. Detective Sarah Hargreaves arrived at the third confirmed scene. She'd worked Bradford her whole career. She knew the mills, the tunnels, the hollow echo of abandoned factories. She had seen overdoses, stabbings, bodies pulled from the river, but nothing prepared her for Liam. He lay in the basement of Lister Mills, cordon tape fluttering uselessly in the cold air. His fingers were curled, as if he'd tried to grab something that wasn't there. His mouth hung open, jaw stretched too wide. The skin around his eyes sagged slightly, as though something underneath had deflated. The smell wasn't decay. It was absence. Cold, burnt, like an electrical fire that had already finished. Her partner, D.S. Carter, crouched beside the body and muttered something under his breath. He reached out with a gloved hand and touched Liam's wrist. The skin slipped. It peeled back easily, revealing nothing but hollow space beneath. No bone. No blood. Carter swallowed hard. Sarah stood and swept her flashlight across the basement. Rusted machines loomed like carcasses in the dark. Water pooled in the corners, stagnant and black. The air felt thick, unmoving. Then her beam caught something in the far shadows. Movement. It was subtle at first, a shifting shape behind an old metal frame. She stepped forward, raising her light. The shape turned toward them. It didn't look human. It had too many bends, angles that twisted wrong. Something like shoulders, something like limbs, but not arranged in a way that made sense. Its surface shimmered faintly, like stretched fabric over emptiness. For a brief, awful second, the shape rippled. Liam's face formed across it, not fully, just the suggestion of eyes, the outline of a mouth. Then it slid back into formless flesh. Carter swore. Sarah felt something in her chest drop, like an elevator losing cable. It wasn't an animal. It wasn't a person. It was wearing what it found. The shape recoiled deeper into the shadows and vanished between the rusted machines, flowing rather than running. Sarah didn't speak of what she'd seen in her official report, but she started digging. She traced old architectural maps of the mills and the tunnels beneath them. Bradford had layers, old sewers turned into makeshift shelters, maintenance corridors sealed and forgotten. Hollow spaces under hollow spaces. That's where she went next. The tunnels were silent. Not the usual dripping and echoing silence. A thick silence, as if sound itself had been absorbed. She moved carefully, boots splashing through shallow water, her flashlight beam cutting through the dark. She found discarded blankets, cans, signs that people had once lived there. Now it felt abandoned. Then she heard it, a whimper, soft, broken. She followed it down a narrow side passage. A man sat against the wall. Jack, she recognized him faintly. He'd been picked up for loitering before. His eyes were wide, white showing all around, his breath shallow and rapid. "Stay back," he whispered. "It's here." Before she could respond, the darkness behind him shifted. It unfolded slowly. The creature didn't step forward. It poured forward. Its limbs stretched long and thin, bending at impossible angles. The surface of it bubbled and reformed, patches of skin sliding across one another, as if trying on shapes. Jack tried to scream. The creature reached him first. It didn't bite. It didn't tear. It flowed. Like thick liquid, it pressed against his face, his mouth. It slipped through his nose, his eyes, his pores. It sank into him without violence, without haste, filling him from the inside. Jack convulsed for a few seconds. Then he went still. After half a minute, his skin sagged. It slid off his frame and collapsed to the floor. The thing inside rippled, absorbing whatever it had taken. Then it turned toward Sarah. It reached down and lifted Jack's face like a mask. It pulled it over itself. The skin didn't sit right. The mouth stretched too far. The eyes were too wide and too empty. When it opened its mouth, there were no teeth, just a dark hole that seemed to go on and on. Sarah ran. Her boots pounded against the concrete. The sound echoed wetly behind her as it followed. It didn't breathe. It didn't tire. Its steps sounded like something slapping against stone. She reached a small maintenance room and threw herself inside. She shoved a metal shelf against the door and braced it with everything she had. The banging started immediately. Slow, heavy, rhythmic. Then it stopped. Silence fell. Sarah stayed there, shaking, trying to steady her breath. That's when she heard the drip. Not from the floor, from above. She looked up. The vent in the ceiling bulged slightly. Something pale and wet began to ooze through the slats. Thin tendrils stretched down, trembling in the cold air. They touched her cheek, her neck. She tried to scream. The tendrils pressed against her mouth. Her last coherent thought wasn't about dying. It was about being hollowed out. A couple of days later, Carter found her uniform in the sewer tunnel. It was neatly folded against the wall, pressed, empty, no body, no blood, just fabric that looked like it had once held someone. Carter didn't say much after that. He went home early that night. He stood in his bathroom, staring into the mirror, hands braced on the sink. His face looked drawn, pale. He forced a small, reassuring smile at himself. For a split second, his reflection didn't match. The grin lingered just a little longer than his own, and it stretched a little too wide. Story 7. One Saturday morning during my final year of middle school, I woke up with that rare, perfect feeling. No school, no homework due, no alarms. Just a whole day to waste however I wanted. I went straight to my computer. It was an old desktop that took forever to boot. I typed in my password, waited for everything to load, and opened YouTube. I planned to spend the morning watching gaming videos and random funny clips. That's when I saw it. One new email. I assumed it was from one of my friends. We used email a lot back then to send each other memes and dumb links. I clicked into my inbox. The subject line read, "Don't click me." That was it. No message preview. No friendly name attached. Just some email address I didn't recognize. I rolled my eyes. Very funny, I muttered to myself. I didn't open it. I just deleted it and went back to YouTube. I didn't think about it again until that evening. After dinner, I got back on my computer to check a few things before bed. I opened my email again. Another unread message. Same subject line. Don't click me. Same sender. Now, I was annoyed. At first, I had thought it was some random spam. Now, it felt deliberate. Maybe one of my friends had made a fake account to mess with me. I deleted it again. "This isn't funny," I said out loud, even though no one was in my room. I shut down the computer and went to play Xbox instead. A few rounds of Call of Duty helped me forget about it. Later that night, right before bed, I made one last stop at my computer. I don't even know why. Habit, I guess. I opened my inbox. There it was again. Don't click me. Same sender. Third time in one day. Something about that repetition made it feel less like a prank and more like a dare. I hesitated for a few seconds. Then I clicked it. Inside was almost nothing. Just a short line of text and a link to a Google Doc. That should have been another red flag. Instead, curiosity won. I clicked the link. The document opened instantly. The first image loaded slowly, pixel by pixel. It showed a man standing behind what looked like a kitchen counter. There was a plate in front of him with what looked like meat on it. But something about it was wrong. The color. The shape. It didn't look like steak or chicken. It looked human. I felt my stomach tighten. I scrolled down. The next image made my chest feel hollow. It was the same man. He was standing over a stove, and on the stove was something small, something wrapped in foil or cloth. The caption underneath was short and sick. Dinner. The image looked like he was cooking a baby. I froze. For a few seconds, I couldn't even breathe. My mind tried to convince me it was fake. Photoshop. Some twisted joke. But it looked too real. The lighting matched. The shadows were right. The expressions on the man's face were detailed and clear. I slammed the monitor off without even properly closing the page. My hands were shaking. I went straight to bed, but sleep didn't come easily. That night, I had nightmares. I saw that man's face in my dreams, saw him standing at the edge of my bed, saw plates of meat on my desk. I woke up sweating more than once. Sunday morning came, and I told myself I wasn't going to look at my email. Of course, I did anyway. Another message waited for me. Same sender. This time, the subject line read, "Why did you click it?" My heart started pounding. I shouldn't have opened it, but I did. Another link. Another Google Doc. I clicked it. The first image that loaded was worse than the night before. It showed a body on a table, skin removed, organs gone, just red muscle and bone structure. No face left to recognize, just a shape that used to be human. I screamed. I don't even remember doing it. I shut the computer down immediately. I didn't scroll further. I didn't read anything else. I just turned it off. For the rest of that Sunday, I avoided my computer completely. I tried to distract myself. I watched cartoons I grew up with. SpongeBob, Hey Arnold, Cow and Chicken. I played Fortnite and Minecraft on my Xbox. I tried to laugh, but every time I closed my eyes, I saw that image. Monday was the last day before spring break. I didn't want to tell anyone. I was embarrassed, scared they'd think I'd searched for something messed up. But during lunch, I finally told one of my closest friends. He didn't laugh. He didn't look confused. He grabbed my arm and pulled me into the boys' bathroom. "I got them too," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "The same subject line?" I asked. He nodded. "Same images." He nodded again, eyes wide. "I'm too scared to open my email now," he said. That's when I realized it wasn't random. We went to the police station right after school. Explaining it to the officer felt surreal. Saying the words out loud made it sound even worse. They took our statements, asked for the email addresses, screenshots. We gave them everything we had. That evening, both of us got a text message. "Unknown number." All caps. "Why would you do that?" My heart nearly stopped. I called my friend immediately. He had gotten the exact same text. We went back to the police station. The officers took our phones and told us they were already working on it. That night, I barely slept. Tuesday morning, I opened my email. Nothing. No new messages. I texted my friend. "Anything?" No. For the first time in days, I felt a small bit of relief. Later that afternoon, I checked a news site. There was a headline. Police had tracked down a man responsible for sending disturbing graphic material to minors. He had been arrested early that morning. They showed his mugshot. It was the same man from the photos. He looked smaller without the staged horror. Less powerful. Just another sick individual who had thought he was untouchable behind a screen. Eventually, the story faded from the news cycle. He was convicted, sentenced. The emails stopped permanently. Spring break came and went. Life slowly returned to normal. But even now, years later, sometimes when I see a new email notification pop up unexpectedly, my chest tightens. And every time I see a subject line in all caps, even if it's harmless, I hesitate for just a second longer than I should, because once I clicked something that told me not to. And I'll never fully forget what I saw. Story 8. My younger brother, Ryan Thornton, killed himself. Even writing that sentence feels wrong, like I'm describing someone else's life. Ryan was steady. He was the kind of man who paid his bills on time, took care of his kid, fixed what broke, and didn't panic when things got hard. The last time we spoke, he sounded tired, sure, but not unstable, not reckless, not the kind of person who would decide to end everything in a single afternoon. But he did. And before he did, he left something behind that keeps crawling into my mind at night. A story, a confession, a warning, whatever you want to call it. You might have seen his post online. It was titled, "Lost Children." I didn't read it at first. When I got the call, I was working a case in Arkansas, and I didn't have the emotional space to go looking through my brother's internet history. I just got in my car and drove. I have contacts in federal agencies, people who still owe me favors from old cases, and I used every one of them to get there fast. I was on the scene before the local system could even decide what kind of paperwork this would become. His house was a small blue 2-bedroom in a quiet part of West Virginia, the kind of place you'd pick if you wanted peace. Red and blue lights painted the front yard in constant flashes. I can still see those colors in my head, bouncing off his windows like emergency signals meant for someone who couldn't hear them anymore. The local police acted like this was routine. They stood around in the yard, talking to each other, sipping coffee, glancing at me like I was just another relative about to cry and make their shift harder. No urgency, no curiosity, no edge in their voices. That bothered me immediately, because nothing about Ryan's life felt routine. and the details I was seeing didn't match a clean, simple explanation. Inside, the bedroom smelled like metal and smoke, and something sour underneath it. Ryan was on the bed. The top of his head was gone. Blood had soaked into the carpet, and the wall behind the bed was marked in a way you don't forget once you've seen it. I've been a detective for 25 years. I have walked into plenty of scenes that made me angry, plenty that made me sick, plenty that made me want to drag someone into daylight and let the world see what they really were. This one didn't feel like rage at a stranger. It felt like my body was trying to reject the reality that it was my brother. The first thing I noticed was his posture. He wasn't just lying there. His arms were positioned like he had been holding something close, like a person clinging to a child in a storm. The locals didn't mention it. They didn't even seem to notice. They were too focused on the obvious horror of what happened to his head and the weapon near him, like the rest of the room didn't matter. I started searching, not like a grieving brother, like a cop who refuses to accept a convenient answer. I checked his desk, his computer, his phone, his books, the drawers, the closet. I looked for a note, a message, anything that would explain why Ryan, who had a daughter he adored, would choose to leave her behind. That's when I found what changed everything. The post he had written, "Lost Children." I read it with my jaw tight, my hands shaking, trying to keep my mind from jumping to conclusions. In the post, Ryan claimed he died holding his daughter's body in his hands, not metaphorically, not emotionally. He wrote it like he was describing something physical, something that had weight and warmth, and then the sudden absence of it. But here was the problem. Destiny wasn't there. My niece's body was not in the room. Not anywhere in the house. No sign of her, alive or dead. If Ryan's post was true, then someone had taken her away before police arrived. If it wasn't true, then my brother had lied in his final moments. Ryan was not a liar. He could be stubborn, he could be private, but he didn't invent tragedies for attention. The way he wrote didn't sound like a man chasing sympathy. It sounded like a man trying to leave breadcrumbs before the lights went out. So I treated it like a real case. I ordered evidence collection like I had the authority, because with my background and my connections, I might as well have. Hair, DNA, blood samples, skin, anything that could be lifted without destroying the scene. If someone had been there, I wanted a trace of them. If destiny had been there, I wanted proof. I took special interest in Ryan's left leg because it didn't match the rest of the simple suicide story the locals kept repeating. He had been shot in the leg, not a graze, not an old injury. Fresh damage, bullet fragments in the calf. That alone should have turned this into something bigger, something that required questions. But the local cops barely reacted when I pointed it out. They looked at me like I was annoying them, like I was a man trying to complicate their day. I sent the bullet pieces to forensics. I checked doors and windows. No forced entry, no broken locks, no shattered glass, nothing that suggested a struggle with an intruder. The autopsy report gave a time of death, 4:45 p.m. That's broad daylight, not midnight. Not a time when you could quietly move around without being seen. If Destiny had died there, and someone removed her body, they did it with confidence, or help. And that's when the other ugly thought settled into place. Either someone in that town knew exactly what was happening, or someone in that town was afraid to know. West Virginia and surrounding areas have a long history of missing children cases. You can look that up yourself. That fact doesn't prove anything, but it does create a background noise of tragedy that some people learn to ignore. They stop reacting. They stop asking. They let the disappearances become part of the weather. At the crime scene, I found a strand of blonde hair caught near the bed. I had it bagged and labeled. I also collected blood from Ryan's body and from his shirt. The results came back, and my stomach dropped. The blonde hair belonged to Destiny Thornton. My niece had been missing for 10 years. Let that sink in. 10 years. Her hair was there, in that room, at the scene where my brother died. But her body wasn't. The blood on Ryan's body was his own. That part fit. But the blood on his shirt, the blood he was covered in, was not real human blood. It was artificial. I had seen artificial blood in training scenarios, in movie sets, in staged scenes. It has a different texture. It dries differently. It doesn't behave like the real thing. Whoever put that on Ryan's shirt wanted it to look like something else. I remembered a line from his post. He had written that he was holding Destiny's body while typing, soaked in her blood, and then he added a chilling question. If this is even real blood. He knew. He noticed. He wasn't imagining it. The bullet that hit his leg was identified too. A Hornady Critical Duty 135 grain JHP 9mm. A self-defense round. Something a person carries when they expect danger. Something you fire when you believe someone is a threat. Ryan wasn't the kind of man who went looking for fights. He didn't attack people. He didn't threaten strangers. So why would someone shoot him with a self-defense round? Why would someone feel the need to defend themselves from my brother? That question led me back to the town, back to the beginning of the story Ryan described. Because, as impossible as it sounded, the evidence on my table was telling me one thing. My brother might have been telling the truth. I started digging into the town's history, and the pattern that emerged was not random. Children went missing, but not everywhere. Not in equal numbers. It was concentrated. The kind of concentration that makes your skin tighten, because it suggests a source. So I went where it started, the elementary school. In old records and missing posters, one name kept appearing alongside the first wave of disappearances. A man who wasn't a child, but who vanished around the same time. Alzheimer von Goethe. According to records, he was a third-grade teacher, and then one day he disappeared. After that, his students began to disappear one by one. Children under 9, vanishing without a trace. Destiny was one of his students. The more I learned, the worse it got. Goethe didn't have a normal background. He wasn't simply a teacher who made a bad decision and ran away. The FBI files my contacts pulled for me painted a darker picture. Alzheimer von Goethe had been a German scientist. He had been fired from his work years before arriving in the United States. His experiments were labeled crimes against humanity, not ethics violations, not misconduct, crimes. He believed he was close to immortality. He used unwilling human subjects. He replaced bones with metals, kept certain organs intact while removing others, and tried to create something that could survive beyond what the human body is meant to endure. His dream was an army of soldiers who didn't feel pain, remorse, grief, regret. Soldiers who could be ordered to do anything and would never hesitate. At some point, he arrived in America, and 7 months after he showed up, children started disappearing. Most people assumed Goethe was dead, but there was no proof. No body, no death certificate, no grave, just an absence. In my world, an absence is not evidence of death. Sometimes it's evidence of planning. I needed to know where he was now, and the local police were no help. So I called in older favors, the kind you don't use unless you're willing to accept that you might owe someone later. Friends in intelligence circles helped me access surveillance footage from around town. Hardware stores, electronics shops, gun stores, and that's when I saw him. An older man with a long white beard and an eye patch. Agile for his age, moving with purpose. He bought thousands of dollars worth of tools and equipment. That alone isn't a crime. But he wasn't alone. In the passenger seat of his car was a child. When we zoomed in, I recognized him from the missing posters. Michael Norton Jr., a boy who had disappeared 10 years earlier, the son of a respected Marine named James Norton. Michael should have been 19 by now. He wasn't. He looked 9. Same face, same size, same posture. He sat in the car like he was trained to sit, hands folded, waiting with an unnatural patience. Children don't wait like that unless they've been taught to fear consequences, or unless something inside them no longer works the way it should. The man's car was identified too. A 2014 Volkswagen Passat 1. Date T. Clean, ordinary, almost boring. The kind of vehicle that doesn't draw attention. We tracked the car across town using camera feeds from traffic lights and gas stations and store lots. The trail led out toward the mountains. And then it ended where the cameras couldn't reach. That was exactly what Ryan had written about. He said he went into the mountains looking for destiny. So I formed a team. 3 of us. Me, Leon Quinn from the CIA, Walter Greenland from the FBI. 3 men who had seen enough to stay calm when things got strange, who knew how to move, how to cover angles, how to keep their heads when fear starts whispering. We drove into the town and felt the emptiness right away. Barely any traffic. People staying inside. The kind of quiet that isn't peaceful. The kind that feels like a town holding its breath. We reached the trail leading up into the forest, and there were police cars parked nearby like they were watching it, waiting. I didn't like that. It felt staged. When we started up the trail, an officer ran after us, yelling that we couldn't go in. I showed my badge. Walter and Leon showed theirs too. The moment the local cops realized who they were dealing with, their energy drained. They backed off, but not before giving us looks that said, "Don't make us regret letting you pass." We hiked for miles before spotting a hidden path, masked by brush. Past it, there were fences, barbed wire stretched around a wide perimeter. Not the kind of fence someone puts up to keep deer out. The kind of fence you build when you're afraid of what might wander in, or what might wander out. Leon put on protective gloves and cut through with heavy tools. We slipped under and kept moving. The forest around us was filled with traps, tripwires, hidden pits, covered in leaves, cable snares, the kind of setups meant to injure and kill. Whoever built them didn't care if a hiker got hurt. They wanted anyone who came near to leave in pieces, or not leave at all. We finally emerged to see a massive property fenced, like a prison, with a large house set back behind it. Signs were posted everywhere. Private property. Surveillance. Keep out. You are being watched. We cut the gate and moved in, and there it was, the Volkswagen. The same car from the footage. My chest tightened, not with victory, but with dread, because it meant we were close. And when you get close to something like this, you either stop it or it swallows you. Walter picked the lock at the front door and forced it open. We went in with weapons drawn, announcing ourselves, sweeping corners, clearing rooms. At first, the place looked normal. Expensive furniture, clean floors, a staircase with a red carpet, a table with a lamp and a magazine. Nothing obvious. Then we heard it. Children laughing. Not upstairs. Not outside. Down below. Faint but clear. like sound traveling through vents. Walter noticed light footprints in the carpet on the stairs, and he started talking about specialized devices and latent prints like he was giving a lecture. I cut him off and told him to keep it simple. He rolled his eyes and said he had gear to trace a trail. Leon and I moved deeper into the house, toward the back, following the direction of the sound. We found a basement door. The basement was dark, and there was no visible switch. We turned on the weapon lights and went down carefully. The room below looked like something you'd see in a nightmare someone tries to laugh off the next morning. Concrete floor, cinder block walls, a furnace, a cage big enough for an animal, a workbench, and in the center, an operating table stained with old blood. Shelves lined the walls, vials, jars, containers filled with organs, teeth, pieces of things that used to belong inside people. On the wall, there was a massive banner with Hitler's face and German words printed across it. I didn't need to understand the language to understand what kind of mind placed it there. Whoever lived here wasn't just hiding crimes. He was worshiping them. We heard a grinding movement, slow and heavy, like stone shifting. The operating table slid aside. A hidden stairwell appeared beneath it, leading deeper underground. Walter's voice came through the earpiece, shaken. He had found a room upstairs, filled with medals, Nazi items, diagrams of children's bodies, and books that acted like triggers. He pulled one book, heard a click, and then something moved downstairs. So, the house was built like a trap, like a machine. We regrouped in the basement, staring at the hidden stairs. Behind the door at the bottom, the sound of children playing was louder now, bright and wrong, as if joy itself had been copied and pasted into something that didn't understand it. We opened the door and stepped into a lab. Large glass tubes filled with liquid stood all around us. Inside them, children floated motionless. Some were on tables, still and pale. Notes and tools and metal parts covered surfaces. Machines hummed and clicked somewhere in the shadows. And then something dropped from above. 3 children landed in front of us like they had been waiting on the ceiling. I recognized 2 of them immediately, Michael Norton Jr. and Andre Nicholson. The third was a small red-haired girl I didn't know. All 3 stared at us with flat faces, eyes cold, like anger without emotion. They raised their hands toward us, palms forward, as if focusing. Leon hesitated. Walter hesitated. They saw children and their instincts screamed not to fire. I didn't have the luxury of instincts. I told them to aim for the head, because whatever these were, they were not normal children anymore. 10 years missing, no aging, no fear, no confusion. That doesn't happen by accident. A voice spoke behind us in a German accent, calm and pleased, like a professor stepping into a classroom. He told the children to stop. He called them magnificent. Lights snapped on, and the lab flooded with brightness. A man stepped into view, wearing an eye patch, long white beard, long white hair around a bald crown, standing with the confidence of someone who believed he owned everything under this mountain. Alzheimer von Goethe. He wore clothing styled like a commander, a symbol on his arm that made my stomach burn. He spoke about English like it was something dying, and he spoke about me like I was an interesting specimen. I aimed my weapon at him and told him what he was. A man who hid behind a school job to steal children. A man who turned kids into weapons. A man who called horror science. He didn't deny it. He bragged. He said the children were his now. He said he had perfected them. He said they felt no pain, no remorse, no sorrow, no regret. He said they barely remembered their parents. He called them his perfect children. Then he fled, moving faster than he should have, disappearing into the maze. and the children turned to us. They spoke like machines reading from a script. Trespassing would not be tolerated. We would die for their father. All hail the master race. Their palms changed. Dark openings formed, glowing from within. The air vibrated like a storm building in a sealed room. I shoved Leon and Walter down and yelled for cover. A blast tore into the wall behind us, exploding like a concentrated ball of light. Concrete cracked. Dust filled the air. The sound rang in my ears. Their eyes glowed red. Their fingertips peeled back to reveal metal beneath. Barrels hidden where skin should have been. Their mouths opened too wide, and something extended from inside them. Mechanisms unfolding like the inside of a weapon. When we fired, some bullets hit and pushed them back, and some bounced off like we were shooting armor. Their bodies leaked artificial blood in thin streams, proof that damage was possible, but not simple. The lab turned into chaos. Gunfire. Explosion. Screaming metal. Leon ran for cover and got hit in the back. He fell hard, trying to shoot as he bled out. I fired into Andre's head until the movement stopped. And even then, I didn't trust it. Walter laid down cover fire, and I pulled a grenade, threw it, and the explosion swallowed part of the room in smoke and shattered glass. Gertha's voice came over an intercom, smug and distant. He said they didn't need sleep, they didn't need food, they didn't age. They could live forever. Perfect children. A shape burst from the smoke. Michael. Half his face was torn, exposing a metallic skull beneath. His eyes burned red. He moved like gravity didn't apply to him, sprinting up the wall, across it, toward me faster than any child should move. I fired until my weapon clicked empty. Michael hit me with a punch that felt like getting struck by a vehicle. My body flew back into a metal table, sending tools clattering across the floor. Pain shot through my ribs and shoulder. I gasped, tried to stand, forced myself to reload. Leon was still on the floor, unmoving. Walter limped toward me, injured, and then the small red-haired girl and Michael struck from behind, sending us into the wall. My nose bled, my shoulder screamed. A beam flashed from their eyes. Walter shouted in disbelief. I dove out of the way. As the blast scorched where I'd been standing, Walter fired a burst from his weapon. The children flipped and twisted through the air like acrobats, giggling as if this was a game. More glass broke. More tubes opened. Children stepped out, pale and expressionless, joining the circle around us, like a quiet army waking up. Walter looked at me and made a decision I will never forget. He told me to run. He said he would hold them back. He said he was hurt and would slow me down, but I had to get out and tell the world what was here. I didn't want to leave him. I didn't want to abandon anyone in that room. But I saw the numbers. I saw the way the children moved. I saw how fast hope was shrinking. Walter screamed at me to run. So I ran. I sprinted back through the wooden door, up the hidden stairs, through the basement, up into the house. Behind me, I heard gunfire, then sounds that were not gunfire, metal tearing, bones breaking, things hitting the floor. I did not turn around. I still hear it anyway. 2 of the robotic children dropped in front of me. I fired into their heads and kept moving. I was almost out the front door when a small voice floated behind me, gentle and sweet, like a child asking for a bedtime story. Uncle Brian, don't you want to stay and play? I turned. Destiny stood at the top of the stairs. My niece, same blonde hair, same green eyes, same face from 10 years ago, unchanged. She looked 9 years old, just as she had when she disappeared. A tear ran down my face before I could stop it. My throat tightened until it hurt. I told her no. I told her she wasn't my niece. She smiled like she didn't understand sadness, like she had learned to imitate friendliness without feeling it. She said she was part of the master race now. She asked if she could make me part of them too. I ran out of that house like the air was poison. I made it through the cut fence, down the trail, back to the car. And I didn't stop moving until the trees thinned and I could breathe again. Later, when my hands stopped shaking enough to hold a cup, I sat across from James Norton in a diner with weak coffee and fluorescent lights that made everything look tired. He was older now, hollow in a way only parents of missing children understand. I told him what I saw. I told him about the boy in the car, about the lab, about the children who never aged, about the man who called them his perfect soldiers. James looked at me like he wanted to believe me and couldn't, like his heart was caught between hope and terror. So I pulled out the proof I had kept, a dog tag necklace, his middle initial, his last name. It fell from Michael during the fight. I picked it up because I knew nobody would accept words alone. James stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. His hands trembled as he grabbed the tag, staring at it like it was a ghost. He demanded to know where I got it. I told him the truth. He said he gave that necklace to his son, so the boy would feel brave. Michael had been bullied, and the dog tag made him feel like his father's strength could live on his chest. Tears ran down James's face, and his anger sat on top of his grief like a loaded weapon. After a long silence, he told me if what I said was real, then he wanted to be the one to put a knife in Goethe's heart, if the man even still had one. I told him that was fine. Revenge wasn't my focus, but stopping Goethe was. Whatever he had built in that mountain wasn't a secret anymore. Not to me, not to James. The lost children had finally been found, but they weren't children anymore. Story 9. I've been working on a family history project for a while now, mostly because I like knowing where people came from and how they lived. It started as a harmless curiosity. Names in old photo albums, birth certificates, wedding announcements clipped from newspapers, the normal stuff. A family is like a long hallway lined with doors, and if you've got time and patience, you can open them one by one and see what's inside. A few weeks ago, I went up into my grandma's attic to look through boxes that hadn't been touched in years. The attic was exactly how I remembered it as a kid, hot and dusty, full of old furniture draped in sheets, stacks of cardboard boxes, and the smell of paper that's been sealed away too long. I was expecting more of the same. Maybe a few letters. Maybe a couple of photos of people I didn't recognize. Instead, I found something that made my stomach tighten the way it does when you realize you've stepped into a room you shouldn't be in. It was a plain notebook, the kind you buy for school, and it had a few loose documents clipped to it. They were all tucked inside a yellow file folder that looked older than anything else in the box. The folder didn't have a big label, just a name written in faded ink. Daniel. I knew the name only because I'd heard it twice in my life. Both times were quick and awkward, like someone accidentally said it out loud and immediately regretted it. The first time was at a family gathering when I was younger. An aunt mentioned Daniel in a sentence and then stopped mid-word, like she'd bitten her tongue. The room got quiet. Someone changed the subject. The second time was years later, when I asked my mom about distant relatives. I asked if we had any family members who died young. She hesitated, said there was someone named Daniel, and then told me she didn't really know the details. That wasn't like her. My mom always has details, so finding a folder with his name on it in my grandma's attic felt like discovering a hidden stairwell in a familiar house. I sat down on the attic floor and opened the notebook. The first page had a title written neatly, almost carefully, like the writer wanted it to look official. It said, Daniel's Journal, age 14. There wasn't a year anywhere on the page, only the months and days, as if the year didn't matter, or as if he didn't want it recorded. At first, it read like what you'd expect from a kid who felt alone. He wrote that his mom bought him the notebook because she said writing helps when your thoughts get loud. He wrote that his thoughts were always loud, and he liked the idea of having somewhere to put them. He mentioned that they had moved recently, after his father passed away. He didn't write a lot about the death itself, just a short line about how things hadn't been going well since then. The way he said it felt like he couldn't bring himself to put the real words on the page. He wrote about school. He said nobody really talked to him. He said it annoyed him, and he didn't understand why it was happening. He wrote that he tried to talk to them, he really did, that he asked about games and shows and phones, normal stuff that kids talk about. But they always found a reason to leave. Sometimes they would stare at him first, not even angry, just staring like they were waiting for something. Then they would go. He wrote that his mom said it was okay. She told him, some people are scared of things they don't understand. Daniel wrote that he didn't get it. He wrote, why wouldn't they understand me? He wrote that at least his mom understood him, and she always did. A week later in the journal, he wrote that he tried sitting next to a boy named Jeremy at lunch. The boy stood up right away and moved without saying anything. Daniel wrote that he wasn't sure if he'd said something weird. He wondered if he smelled bad. Then he wrote that his mom washed his clothes. He wrote that she promised, and she would never lie to him. That line felt strange, not because kids don't trust their parents, but because he wrote it like he was holding on to it with both hands. As the entries went on, Daniel's tone shifted in small ways that were easy to miss at first. He wrote about a teacher whispering to another teacher, loud enough for him to hear. That boy isn't right. Daniel wrote that it was like she wanted him to hear it. He wrote that he got good grades and didn't fight or yell, so he didn't understand what made him not right. He wrote that he just felt off sometimes, and he tried to convince himself that it was normal because they'd moved and his dad had died. But then he wrote something that made me pause. He wrote that the looks people gave him made him feel wrong, like his bones were arranged wrong inside him. Then he wrote about his mom again, and the way he wrote about her was almost too devoted, too certain. He wrote that she said he was perfect. He wrote that she kissed his forehead every night and called him her miracle. It wasn't just affection. It sounded like a belief he needed to survive. A few weeks later, he wrote that he tried to join the chess club. They told him it was full, even though there were empty chairs. He counted them. 7 empty chairs. He wrote the number in all caps, as if it was proof that the world was lying to him. He wrote that he asked his mom why people hated him, and she told him they were jealous. He wrote that she was smart and read a lot of books. Then he added that she used to read a lot of books. She didn't much anymore. She'd been tired lately. He started writing about people staring at him in the hallway, like they saw something behind him. He wrote that he turned around once, thinking someone was trying to mess with him. But nobody was there. His mom told him people like to imagine monsters when they're bored. Daniel wrote that she laughed when she said it, so he laughed too. He wrote that he reminded her monsters don't exist. Then he wrote that she laughed harder, but the laugh sounded strange, like it hurt. That small detail felt like a crack in a glass that had been holding water for too long. By May, Daniel wrote about a dream. He said he dreamed his mom was calling him from far away, and her voice sounded slow, like it was underwater. When he woke up, he heard his mom coughing. He wrote that her cough sounded weird. He wrote that he needed to let her rest, and that she didn't need to move until she got better. He wrote about stress and how single moms get stressed, like he was trying to explain the situation to himself, as if explaining it could keep it from changing. Around the middle of May, he wrote that the kids at school didn't pretend anymore. They walked faster when he was near. He admitted he'd been getting fed up, and he thought they could probably see the anger on his face. He wrote that some of them whispered his name like it was a bad word. He wrote that he couldn't stand it because they were the ones treating him badly. He asked his mom why. She told him sometimes people can sense things. He asked her what things. He wrote that she didn't answer. She just hugged him tight, too tight. Then she needed more rest. As the weeks went by, Daniel wrote that his mom hadn't gone to work in weeks. She told him she didn't need to. She told him they were fine. Daniel wrote that he believed her because she promised him, after his dad died, that she wouldn't let anything bad happen to them. But he wrote that her voice sounded different now, more heavy, more sad. He wrote that he would be there for her because she was always there for him. Then he wrote about someone throwing a rock at him. It hit his backpack, and the person ran away. Daniel wrote that he cried when he got home, and his mom told him people fear what they can't fix. Daniel wrote that he didn't know what needed fixing. He wrote that he felt normal. In July, the journal started smelling like the house he described, even though it was just paper. He wrote that his mom smelled weird sometimes. Not exactly bad, but off. He wrote that he didn't think she used deodorant anymore. He wrote that she mumbled. He wrote that he didn't think it was just a cold because colds don't last that long. He wrote that the house smelled like pennies and dirt ever since she stopped cleaning. He thought about cleaning himself, even though his mom always warned him to stay away from the chemicals. He asked her about the smell. She told him he was imagining it. So he stopped asking. Then he wrote something that made my throat go dry. He wrote that he thought he knew why people didn't like him. He wrote that they could probably see it, whatever it was. The thing his mom told him not to worry about. The thing she never explained. He wondered if he was sick. His mom told him doctors lie and would try to take him away for being different. Daniel wrote that he didn't want that and that he wouldn't let them. He wrote, being different is okay. It's okay. By August, he wrote that his mom didn't move much now. She sat in her chair all day. Sometimes her head drooped, as if she wasn't sleeping. But sometimes she wasn't sleeping. Just tired. He wrote that he lifted her head back up, and she smiled at him. He wrote that he loved his mom and hoped she got better soon. A couple of weeks later, he wrote that the neighbors watched their house. He wrote that he saw them through the window whispering to each other and pointing. He closed the curtains. He wrote that he was done going to school. He wrote that he hated all of them. His mom told him it was them against the world. Daniel wrote that he liked that. He wrote that us was enough. In September, he wrote about bugs in the kitchen. A lot of them. He used bug spray even though he wasn't supposed to. He wrote that his mom hated bugs and thanked him. He wrote that he liked it when she thanked him. He wrote about the school calling and asking why he hadn't been coming. He told them his mom was sick. He wrote that he wanted to say something meaner. They asked how sick she was, and he hung up. He wrote that it wasn't their business. By October, Daniel wrote that he didn't miss school at all. He wrote that he tried so hard to fit in and make friends, but they hated him anyway. He wrote that it was better now. Just him and his mom all day, every day. He wrote that they watched TV and played board games and had fun even though she was still sick and couldn't do much. Then he wrote that he wished things could stay that way forever. That sentence sat on the page like a nail. A few days later, he wrote that he thought someone was coming. He heard cars in the driveway. His mom told him not to open the door. Someone knocked and left. Daniel wrote that he wished the world would leave them alone. The last entry was October 23rd. It was short and scared. He wrote that it might be his last time writing. He wrote that there was something upstairs, he thought, or maybe it had always been there, waiting. He wrote that his mom said he would be safe if he listened. So he would. He promised. And that was it. The journal ended there, like the writer disappeared mid-sentence, even though the last line was complete. I sat there with my hands on the paper, feeling like I'd been listening to a voice through a wall, and the voice had just stopped. Then I opened the yellow folder. There was an incident report inside, typed and formal, with parts redacted. The tone of it was completely different from the journal. No feelings. No confusion. Just facts lined up like bricks. It said that at around 9:42 p.m. on October 23rd, dispatch received a call from a neighbor. The neighbor reported a juvenile male behaving erratically in the front yard, yelling incoherently, holding a kitchen knife. 2 officers responded. When they arrived, they saw a teenage boy later identified as Daniel, age 15, barefoot in the driveway. The report described him as malnourished, wearing heavily soiled clothing. It said he was speaking to himself and repeating, "She told me not to let you in." The officers tried to talk him down, but Daniel retreated into the house. They followed. Inside, the home was in extreme disarray. Garbage, spoiled food, insects, debris everywhere. The report mentioned a strong odor consistent with decay. While they searched, Daniel emerged from a hallway and charged an officer, stabbing her in the shoulder. They subdued him with a taser and restrained him. One officer brought Daniel outside and put him in the back of the squad car. The injured officer waited by the car for medical assistance. The other officer continued searching the residence. The smell got worse near the basement door. The report said the basement door was secured with a padlock, so the officer forced it open. The basement was unfinished, mostly empty. And in the basement, seated in a chair and bound with rope, was a dead adult female, later identified as Daniel's mother. Her body was described as being in an advanced state of decomposition. The report estimated she'd been dead 4 to 5 months. I stared at that line for a long time. 4 to 5 months. That meant she likely died in late May or early June, around the time the journal started talking about her coughing, her rest, her changing voice. It meant that many of the entries, the ones where Daniel described her smiling at him, thanking him, watching TV with him, might have been written while she was already dead. The report described the basement area around her. There were makeshift living supplies, candles, notebooks, audio recordings. There was a camera. The camera contained photos of Daniel with his deceased mother. The earliest photos dated back to mid-May. The photos showed Daniel doing normal activities with her body, like playing cards, watching TV, eating, and playing board games. The report noted that the basement looked like it had been arranged to resemble a living space, even though it was filthy. The report said evidence suggested Daniel had been living in the basement with the deceased for an extended period of time, possibly longer than the photos showed. Neighbors reported that Daniel had been acting strangely for months, wearing dirty clothing, staring at people, speaking to himself. Multiple residents said they avoided him because of his disturbing demeanor. The report noted that no welfare checks had been conducted. The school reported that Daniel had always been an odd child, but had become more erratic in the weeks before he stopped showing up. They confirmed that when they finally called the house, Daniel answered and said his mom was sick, but he hung up when they tried to ask more. The report said the cause of death was pending autopsy. It said it was unclear whether the mother's death was natural or foul play. It said, Daniel appeared to have suffered a severe psychological break and maintained the belief that his mother was alive. It said it was unclear whether Daniel was responsible for her death. It noted there were no clear signs of physical trauma on the body, but decomposition was so advanced that it would be difficult to tell without a thorough autopsy. Then it said Daniel was taken into custody and fitted in full-body restraints. It said he was severely erratic and awaiting trial. The case was referred to Psychiatric Services and Homicide Division. The last lines of the report were the most human part of it. The officer wrote that it was unlike any case he had ever seen, and he hoped he never saw anything like it again. When I finished reading, my mouth was dry. I didn't feel like I'd learned a family secret. I felt like I'd stepped too close to something that still had heat in it, even decades later. I looked back down at the journal entries with different eyes. The rest his mother needed, the way he described her not moving much, the way he lifted her head and she smiled, the way he wrote about the smell of pennies and dirt, the way he stopped going to school and closed the curtains, the way he wrote that it was them against the world and us, was enough. Now those lines didn't sound like a kid being dramatic. They sounded like a kid trying to keep his life from collapsing by pretending it already hadn't. And the last entry, the one where he wrote about something upstairs waiting, didn't read like a ghost story anymore. It read like the moment his mind couldn't hold the lie together, like the moment he could feel reality moving toward him from behind a locked door. The report described him outside that night, barefoot, with a knife, yelling, repeating that she told him not to let them in. It was the same idea he wrote about in the journal. His mom says don't open the door. Mom knows best. Someone knocked. They left. The world should leave them alone. She told me not to let you in. It fit together too neatly. Like the journal wasn't just the rambling of a lonely kid, but a record of a slow, careful breakdown. And the incident report was the final page written by someone else. I sat in my grandma's attic for a long time after that, listening to the quiet house below me. The attic felt hotter, like the air had thickened. I kept expecting footsteps on the stairs, even though I knew nobody was coming up. I kept thinking about the photos mentioned in the report, the ones where Daniel played cards and board games with his mother's body arranged like she was alive. I tried to picture what those photos looked like, and my mind kept refusing to complete the image. Every time I got close, something in me pulled away, like my brain was protecting itself. What scared me most wasn't just what Daniel did. It was how long it went on, and how many people noticed something was wrong but didn't step in. Neighbors saw him. The school noticed changes. People whispered about him and avoided him. And for months, nobody forced the door open. Nobody made sure there was food in the house. Nobody checked on his mother. Everyone just kept their distance because the kid felt unsettling. I understand fear. I understand not wanting trouble. But reading those pages, it felt like watching a car crash in slow motion, where everyone sees the car drifting and nobody grabs the wheel. And then there was the rope. The report said his mother was found seated in a chair, bound with rope. I can't stop thinking about that detail, because it doesn't have a simple meaning. It could mean Daniel tied her there, to keep her upright, to keep her in place, to keep his version of life stable. It could mean he didn't want her falling over, because if she fell, she might stop looking like she was still there. Or it could mean something else, something worse, something I don't want to accuse a 14-year-old of without knowing the truth. But either way, rope doesn't tie itself. The more I thought about it, the more I understood why my family never gave me a straight answer about Daniel. Because it's not a story you tell casually. It's not a story you bring up at holidays. It's not a story you attach to your family name unless you have to. It's the kind of story families bury in an attic and hope the dust does its job. And the most disturbing part is that Daniel didn't write like a monster. He wrote like a kid who wanted friends, a kid who missed his dad, a kid who believed his mother loved him, a kid who slowly lost the ability to tell the difference between comfort and decay. Even now, thinking about that last entry, I don't know what he meant by the thing upstairs. Maybe it was the police. Maybe it was the neighbors. Maybe it was the reality he'd been pushing away finally pushing back. Or maybe, after months of living with death in the basement, his mind started giving fear a shape, because fear is easier to face when it has a shape. I don't know what happened to Daniel after he was taken into custody. The documents in the folder stopped there. No trial paperwork. No hospital records. No obituary. Just that journal, ending on October 23rd. And an incident report, filed by an officer who sounded like he wanted to forget the whole thing as soon as the ink dried. I put the notebook back in the folder when I was done. I clipped the papers neatly, the same way they had been clipped when I found them. Like putting them back in order could make them less real. Then I closed the box and carried it downstairs. And for the rest of the day, every normal sound in the house felt wrong. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft click of a door, the distant bark of a dog outside. All of it felt like the kind of normal life Daniel tried to recreate in a basement, with candles and notebooks and a camera, while the world above him kept moving on without checking the locked door. And I keep thinking, if I hadn't opened that box, Daniel would still be just a name my family avoided, a shadow in the family tree. Now he feels like a person who lived and suffered and broke, and the proof of it sat forgotten in the dark for years, waiting for someone to read it and finally understand why the name Daniel made everyone go quiet. Story 10. Years back, I worked in lumber and forestry outside a small mountain town that most people probably wouldn't remember now. I left for good around this same time of year. Funny enough, we were in the middle of a warm spell during one of the coldest winters anyone could remember, just like what's happening now. The air had that strange softness to it, the kind that makes you forget how deep winter really is. The work was tough. Clearing overgrowth from a mountainside always is. We spent long days cutting through thick brush, hauling limbs, feeding chippers, and watching the sun crawl across a white sky. My hands were always sore, my back constantly tight. But I didn't mind it. Back then, I had something bright waiting for me. I was just a few days away from 5 days in sunny Florida with the prettiest girl I had ever known. Her name was Shelley. She lived in town and worked evenings at a little place called Miller's Mountain Pub. Most nights after work, I would drive down and see her. But that evening, I decided to take an old trail instead. It was a path that cut through the woods from the edge of our work site down into town. Not many people used it anymore. In fact, I had never once seen another soul on it. I was just coming up to the trailhead when a man stepped out from the trees and stood there like he had been waiting for me. He didn't jump out or startle me on purpose. He simply appeared. One moment the path was empty, and the next he was there, watching me approach. "Get in 6 feet of snow come Monday," he said. He spoke like we were old friends who had already exchanged greetings. No hello, no nod, just those words. 6 feet, I replied, trying to keep my tone light. There was already about a foot of snow on the ground, and we were used to that. But 6 feet, that was something else entirely. "Come Monday," he repeated. His voice was flat, not friendly, not angry. It carried no emotion at all, just a dull, steady tone that felt wrong somehow. "Well," I said with a small laugh, "I hope it doesn't mess with my travel plans." "Off to sunny Florida?" he asked. That caught me off guard. I hadn't told anyone on the mountain about Florida. Sure, it could have been a lucky guess. Lots of folks head south this time of year. Still, something inside me tightened. Heck of a guess, I said. 6 feet coming Monday, he said again. Might want to catch an earlier flight. Then he turned and walked away toward the trees. Without another word, I muttered a half-hearted goodbye and shook my head. People in mountain towns can be strange, but there was something about him that didn't sit right. I stepped onto the path, following the deep prints he had made in the wet snow. His boots had left clear tracks. I kept my eyes on them as I walked, thinking about what he had said. 6 feet. It sounded crazy. About halfway down the trail, his tracks simply stopped. They didn't fade. They didn't turn. They didn't circle back. They ended. Right there in the middle of the path. The snow was deep and heavy, untouched on either side. No sign he had stepped off. No sign he had climbed a tree or doubled back over his own prints. It looked as though he had dropped from the sky onto that spot earlier, walked to meet me, and then vanished into thin air. I stood there longer than I cared to admit, scanning the trees, looking for broken branches or disturbed snow. There was nothing. The woods were quiet, too quiet. Finally, I shook myself and continued down the trail, though I glanced back more than once, half expecting to see him standing there again. The town opened up before me soon enough. One of the prettiest mountain valleys you could imagine. No big hotels, no lines of tourists, just a small main street, a handful of shops, and homes nestled against a backdrop of white peaks and dark forest. It looked like something from another century, simple and untouched. I made my way to Miller's Mountain Pub and took a seat at the bar. Shelley was behind the counter, her hair pulled back, her smile warm as ever. "You hear we got 6 feet of fresh powder coming Monday?" I said as she slid me a beer. She raised an eyebrow. "Can't be. I'm leaving for Florida on Monday, and I forbid any weather from ruining my plans." "I have it on good authority," I said. She leaned over and kissed me lightly before moving down the bar to serve another customer. That was when I pulled out my phone and checked the forecast. Snow was coming Monday. 3 inches. I almost laughed out loud. 3 inches. Not 6 feet. Just a normal little snowfall. Still, over the weekend I kept checking. I don't know why. Maybe that man's voice had stuck with me. Maybe it was the way he had known about Florida. Whatever the reason, I refreshed the weather app more than I usually would. The number kept rising. By Sunday, they were predicting a foot of snow. Heavy and wet because of the warm spell. Not unheard of, but more than expected. How about we grab an earlier flight? I asked Shelley that night. We could catch the 5 a.m. She shook her head. "I don't get off until midnight. I'm not getting on a plane with only 5 hours between that and my last pour." We talked it over and decided I would take the early flight to Nashville and wait for her there. If anything went wrong, at least I'd get to Florida first and make sure we didn't lose the hotel reservation. "As long as you're the only one staying in it," she teased, flashing that smile that made everything else disappear. The next morning, the sky was a dull gray, thick with clouds. Snow was definitely coming. But still, it didn't look like anything close to 6 feet. My buddy Hank picked me up and drove me to the airport. "Gonna get some plowing done today," he said cheerfully. He made good money whenever the snow hit. I nodded and texted Shelley, telling her to head out as soon as she woke up. My flight to Nashville was smooth. When I landed, I checked the weather again. Rain, no snow. The system had shifted south. Everything looked fine. I grabbed a seat at a bar near the gate, where Shelley's flight was supposed to arrive. I ordered a drink and watched the entrance. Every time someone came through, My heart jumped. Hours passed. She didn't appear. At first, I told myself her flight must have been delayed. Maybe she was grabbing food. Maybe she was in the restroom. But after a while, my nerves started to build. I checked the weather again. As the app loaded, I glanced up toward the TV mounted above the bar. That's when I saw her. Not in the doorway. Not walking toward me with her bag slung over her shoulder. She was on the screen. A smiling photo of her face filled the television. The same photo she still had on her social media. Beneath it were the words, "Missing." For a second, I felt relief. I actually thought she was part of some local segment. Some kind of mistake. Maybe they were asking for help finding someone else. Then her face disappeared and was replaced by another. Then another. Then another. The room around me seemed to go quiet. The sounds of glasses clinking and people talking faded into the background. I looked down at my phone. 2 bold words filled the weather app. Avalanche warning. I looked back up at the television. The faces were gone now. In their place was helicopter footage. A wide, white landscape stretched between 2 muddy mountainsides that were strangely bare of snow. In the center of that valley was what looked like nothing but a smooth, endless blanket of white. At the bottom of the screen, I noticed tracks. A few scattered footprints. They seemed to start from nowhere and lead a short distance before stopping. The airport bar had fallen silent. Over the footage, I heard the flat, steady voice of the news anchor. Multiple buildings have been crushed. Authorities confirm the entire town has been buried under at least 6 feet of heavy, wet snow. The words felt like ice sliding down my spine. The anchor continued, explaining that the warm spell had created unstable layers in the snowpack. When the storm hit, the weight had been too much. The mountainsides gave way. A wall of snow and debris had poured into the valley, burying homes, businesses, cars, everything. They said it happened fast. Too fast for most people to react. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe properly. My mind replayed the trail. The man. His voice. 6 feet coming Monday. The footage zoomed in on a small section where rescuers were digging. The snow looked dense, almost solid. Not the light, fluffy kind kids play in. This was thick and heavy, like wet cement. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Near the bottom of the screen, there were tracks, clear boot prints leading across the surface of the avalanche field. They looked exactly like the ones I had followed on the trail. Deep, evenly spaced, leading from nowhere and stopping nowhere. I don't remember how long I sat there. At some point, my phone started buzzing. Calls from numbers I recognized. Calls from numbers I didn't. I couldn't answer any of them. All I could think about was that man. He had stepped out of the woods as if he knew I would be there. He had known about Florida. He had told me to catch an earlier flight. If I had stayed, if I had taken the later flight with Shelley, I would have been in town when it happened. I later learned the avalanche hit just before noon. Right around the time Shelley would have been driving to the airport. They never found her. They found a few survivors near the edge of town, people who had been high enough up or lucky enough to dig themselves out before the snow hardened. Those were the footprints I saw on the screen, the lucky few. But most of the town stayed buried. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that trail, about how his footprints ended in the middle of the snow, about how calm he was, about how certain. I've gone back to that area once since then. Years later, the town was rebuilt in parts, but it never felt the same. Too many empty spaces, too many names carved into stone. I walked to the old trailhead. The path was still there, and in the snow beside it, I saw a single set of boot prints. They began a few feet ahead of me, as if someone had just stepped down from the sky.